I have to speak about the evolution of the freight payment. Just a few words about carte bancaire. Carte bancaire is a domestic card scheme, French one. It's about almost 80 million of cards, about 17 billion of transactions, and more than 700 billion euros. And we have about 2 million merchants. So it's a big domestic card scheme. And we are involved in PCI for, I would say, more than 15 years now. So I wanted to speak a little bit about the evolution of the freights. Okay. Just a few observations before starting the agenda. I would like to highlight the fact that there are many evolutions today, and I would like to start by three observations. The first one is the EMV. I would say that right now, I think that there are about 30 billion of cards all around the world, and more than 70% of them are EMV cards. So it means that almost, I think that's about 90% of all the banking card transactions are EMV transactions. So it means that in the near future, there will be only EMV transactions. So the second observation that I would like to make is that there will be no more, I would say, magstripe transactions in the near future. So that's very important from a security perspective. So magstripe, I'm pretty sure that in the near future, we should ask, I would say, the brands, but I will not be surprised that they will decide to stop the acceptance of magstripe, and I hope that they will do this in the near future. The third, I would say, observation that I wanted to make is directly linked to authentication. You know that in Europe, thanks to the regulation, European regulation, and the PSD2, the Payment Service Directive number 2, all the online transactions must be authenticated. So it means that in Europe right now, all the card not present transactions are authenticated. And without any doubt, it will be the same everywhere in the world in the near future. So the consequences of this is the devaluation of the sensitive data. You know, we are speaking about payment, the council. The main objective of the council was to secure the sensitive data, to protect data security standard. When you think about the evolution of the payments, you realize that in the near future, I think between 5 and 10 years, I'm pretty sure that all the card transactions, all of them, card present and card not present transactions, will be authenticated. And this is a big consequence for our business. Doesn't mean that we do not have to protect card details or customer data because of privacy, but it will not be necessary for fraud. And that's a very important issue. Up to now, the main objective to protect card details was and is still linked to fraud. It will not be the case in the next, I think, between 5 and 10 years. And I would say more than 5 than 10 years. So now we have to think about the new threats, because it's not because there is a devaluation of data that there is no more risk. There are many risks, but they are different than the ones that we have before. We all know that, and we spoke before that we have what we call the digitalization of the payment industry, I would say. It means that everything now is online. When you have contactless transactions, even through the card or through the mobile, all the transactions, or most of them, are online transactions. Just to give you an example of carte bancaire. Just before the pandemic, before, I would say, the rollout of contactless transactions, we had, in France, 70% of the transactions, the card payment transactions, that were offline because of the chip and PIN. 70% of the transactions were offline. Now, it is less than 30%. Okay? And in the near future, it will be almost 100%. So this is a huge evolution also of the threats. Because when you think about the online transaction, when you think about the digitalization, you have more and more complexity. You have also cloud infrastructure that are used. You have networks, you have service providers, you have a kind of new complexity. We didn't speak about tokenization. Tokenization will be everywhere tomorrow. Tokenization is something that adds some complexity. And each time you add some complexity, you have new, I would say, threats, new risks. So you have to take into account all this new, I would say, situation. If we look at the terminal system, we all know very well, you know certainly better than I would say, PCI PTS standard. Up to now, the reason why we had so much, I would say, security requirements was linked to the theft of data, card details, to the theft of the PIN. It was linked, in fact, to the fact that we had also the max stripe transaction. I remember when I started working in this business, almost 50% of the fraud was linked to the skimming. Now it's almost nothing. I remember also that 10 or 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 70% of the fraud was linked to the card not present transactions. Today, it has decreased a lot because of strong authentication everywhere. So now when you look at the new, I would say, payment terminals, you can see that we were, I would say, up to now, using what I should call bespoke terminals. The operating system was a proprietary operating system. And we are, I would say, evolving to completely open architectures with the Android operating system. And with, I would say, completely open architectures, I mean different protocol, different, I would say, wireless protocols. It's a kind, I would say, of, we were speaking these 2 late days about the soft POS, about the MPOC. This is exactly the reality that we have. I mean that it's a kind of regular IT system today. Up to now, it was bespoke, only dedicated to payment. Now it's completely open, and it's not anymore dedicated to payments. So it means what? It means that we have more and more, I would say, ways, more and more threats, more and more ways to attack, I would say, a payment system. When I say payment system, it's something important. It's not anymore a product. It's a system with the complexity of a system. I worked before working for the banking domain, for card Bancaires, I was working for the IT security agency in France. And at that time, we were, common criteria, speaking about common criteria. It has always been more or less easy to evaluate the security of a product. It is much more difficult to evaluate the security of a system because there are interconnections. Everything is interconnected. And if you have to have an holistic approach of the security, it's something much more difficult than the, I would say, previous one. So when you think about the evolution of the ecosystem, you have to take into account the fact that there are many, I would say, attack surface is much more wider today than it was a few years ago. So we have to deal with that. We have to think about the network protocols. We have to think about the stores. You will have many applications that could be downloaded within the payment terminal. So how can you guarantee the fact that this application on the store will not put malicious codes inside the terminal? You have also new, I would say, services. You have loyalty applications. You have many things, new, I would say, applications that will trigger new threats that imply new vulnerabilities for the payment system. So that's the reason why I say it's from terminal to ecosystem. Terminal is something that is very easy. I would say, I'm not going to say that PCI PTS is something easy to achieve, but nevertheless, it's something that that we can manage. When you think about the ecosystem, it's completely different. It's much more difficult. And the complexity, for me, in the near future, in the next 5 years, we will have to think a lot about this complexity. And each time we can avoid complexity, we must avoid complexity. You will see after my presentation, I will make a big point on service availability, which is for me the most important security pillar that we have to deal with in the next few years. This ecosystem should, I would say, trigger new kind of threats, and one of these could be, I would say, the attempt to service availability. So when we speak about security, but security needs trust, and I would say that also trust needs proofs of security. If, or I would say, the users of a card payment scheme, I mean the end user, the consumers that we are, and also the merchants that are using, I would say, that are proposing these card payment solutions, if they trust this ecosystem, it's because the level of security is high. They are not able to evaluate this level of security. But for them, the ecosystem is a trust-free ecosystem. When we think about ecosystem, what does it mean? Who are, I would say, the players of the ecosystem? Of course, you have the terminal manufacturers, you have the card manufacturers, now you have the mobile, the smartphone manufacturers, but you have also the service providers. We spoke many times during these 2 days about service providers. They are very important today in the payment area. We speak about also all the labs that are, I would say, doing the evaluation. And when we say evaluation, when I say evaluation, I don't say only security evaluation. Functional evaluation is something very important. The quality of the payment transactions is something very important. So when you think about this evolution, you have to think about all the players. The players are also the standardization bodies. PCI with other standardization body, there were a very interesting presentation with EMVCO and PCI. That's absolutely necessary. The standardization bodies, we need them. And we will need them more tomorrow than today. But we should think about widening this, I would say, cross works with the standardization bodies. We are speaking about FIDO, W3C, ISO standards. So there are many, I would say, domains where we have to work all together in order to avoid, complexity and to do many things again. We have also the regulation. We have, when I started working in this domain, I was wondering, I thought that it was better to have a self-regulation, We must do the things by ourselves, and typically, PCI is a self-regulatory. But I realized, after a few years, that it's necessary but not sufficient. I just take the example of the card-not-present fraud. I said to you before that 10 years ago, 70% of the fraud was card-not-present fraud, and card-not-present transactions represented at that time less than 10% of the transaction. Less than 10% of the transaction, 70% of the fraud. As you may know, the fraud was supported by the merchants. Most of the fraud was supported by the merchant. And they didn't want authentication because they were thinking that authentication will, I would say, diminish the transformation rate. Okay? So they accepted a certain level of fraud. If we have done the authentication, if we have make a generalization of strong authentication for all the card-not-present transactions in Europe, it's because of the regulation, not the self-regulation. It was, I would say, a failure because of the European Central Bank, because of the European Commission, we had the PSD2, and thanks to the PSD2, now all the card-not-present transactions are authenticated. So I just wanted to highlight the fact that we need all the players, all the industry, all the banks. The banks are absolutely fundamental. The card schemes are absolutely fundamental. Visa, MasterCard, Amex, GCB, Card Bancaires, all of them. The manufacturers, the standardization bodies, the labs, the regulatory bodies, all of them are absolutely essential to guarantee a good level of security. So when we think about this, this trust, we need also to think about the security layers, I would say. So when you think about the security layers, so you have the players, and after we say, okay, I need to protect the sensitive data, the customer data, not only the card details. Because when you make an online purchase, you give your first name, your family name, your address, your email address, you give everything. So you need to protect all this information. It's not only card details. So you need encryption for both storage and transmission. The different level. It could be at the network level, it could be at the application level, you need, and that's what PCI DSS and other, of course, point-to-point encryption, they're asking for. We need also, I would say, we need to guarantee the integrity, of course. And imagine that I'm making a purchase of 100 euros, at the end of the day, it will be debited on my account 200 euros. That's a big issue. So we need to think about the guarantee of the integrity at different level also. And sometimes, most of the time, it's only at the network level and not at the application level. I'm not going to elaborate on that, but that's an important issue. And there is another thing, which is for me absolutely essential, is the service availability. You know, when I started working security, a long time ago now, there are 3 pillars: confidentiality, integrity, service availability. Up to now, we have worked mainly on the first pillars, confidentiality and integrity. And I bet that in the near future, the third one will be the most important one. So when we have these new, I would say, payment terminals, what we call richer payment systems, we have new threats, of course. We have threats linked to the operating system. Android is a completely well-known operating system that is, I would say, attacked everywhere in the world. So we have to think about the protection. It means customization of the operating system, because the fraudsters, the attackers, they want to add their privilege. You have also threats against out-of-scope components. When you have the PCI PTS standard, the MPOC standard, you have some components. Now, when you think about this new, I would say, means of payment, this new payment system, you have new, I would say, ways to attack. For instance, you could have the remote administration. You could have, I said before, the apps that could come from the app stores, and you can insert malicious codes coming from this app. So you have to, I would say, enlarge the perimeter, the surface of these security standards. And you have the threats against the payment logic. A big part of this, I would say, new architecture, new open architectures, or most of them, they are completely distributed architectures. So it means that a big part of them will be in the cloud, are already in the cloud, but will be more and more in the cloud with many, I would say, network protocols. So we have to think about the man-in-the-middle attack, the DDoS attack, so all the new, I would say, vectors that could jeopardize also the security of the payment system. Just to give you new examples, I just spoke about these new threats against clouds, infrastructure, networks, denial of service threats, threats against merchant assets, that's what I said just before. Merchant assets, it's not only card details. You know, when you speak about card on file, you know, from the internet, of course you have the card details, but now you have the tokens rather than the cards, but you have the customer information. So all this information, and you have also the data, I would say the transmission data. So you have to think about protecting all this, I would say, comprehensive information, and you do not have to focus only on the sensitive card details information. We had before information concerning the converging between security from the mobile payment and the mobile acceptance. That's really, I'm not going to say again what I would say Arman and Andrew said before. We need to work all together. There is no way anymore, you know, to make a split between the security on the issuing domain and security on the acquiring domain. Everything is linked. So we have to have an holistic approach. And I would say, I'm very happy to see more and more works between EMVCo and PCI, because that's the right direction. We need to work all together. The main security issues that we have for mobile acceptance are exactly the same that we have with mobile payment. Resilience is absolutely key. If you have to just to remind something that I said today, will be this word, resilience. Because of the complexity, because of the online system everywhere, because of the tokenization, because of the encryption everywhere, the question of resilience will be at the heart, I would say, of our, I would say, security preoccupation. When we say resilience, you know, in Europe now we have two new, I would say, regulation. The first one is DORA, the second one is CRA. DORA means Digital Operational Resilience Act, and the second one is linked to the product, it's Cyber Resilience Act. So it's directly linked to the financial domain, institutions. So and that's a very good news also. Yeah? We were speaking about PSD2 concerning the authentication for the card not present transactions. Now it's exactly the same with the resilience. So all the financial institutions will have to fulfill this new regulation by the end of 2025. So it's tomorrow. And that's really, really, really important. For me, it will be, as I said before, the most important thing tomorrow. So what do we have to do for the PCI, I would say, Council? First of all, I would like to say that PCI, during the last now 70 years, has done a very incredible job. We need all these standards. When you have the PCI DSS, you know, data security standard, but when you look at the standard, the version 4 standard, it's much more than data. It's much wider than that. For me, it's PCI security standard. And if you comply with this standard, you reduce a very important number of different risks. It's not only the protection of the sensitive data. And that's, for me, something very important. I bet that in the next 5 years, the fraud rate will not be an issue anymore. Really. Even if there are some countries today that are not, I would say, making authentication for all the card not present transactions, I'm pretty sure that in the next 5 years, most of the transactions, most of them, card present transactions and card not present transactions, will be authenticated without any doubt. But we need standards, security standards. We need security standards to be able, I would say, to manage these new threats, to reduce the new risks, and especially the service vulnerability. And for me, you know, I consider that we need PCI standards tomorrow as we need them up to now, you know. We need them, I would say, more or less forever, you know, because global standardization is absolutely necessary to avoid competition between brands. One of the very good things that has been done by PCI through these standards, one of the consequences, the main consequences, is that because you have to fulfill, I mean, all around the world, the same regulation, the same security regulation, you do not have competition on security. And that's, for me, absolutely necessary. So I'm pretty sure, we have, all of us, we need to work all together in order to maintain and to create new security standards, because the evolution of the payment industry has never been so incredible than what we have done up to now. So I hope that you share, I would say, my vision on this necessary third pillar of availability. Just to give you an example, last Saturday in France, we had, during 1 hour, a disruption for big retailers linked to a service providers during 1 hour. 1 hour. I can tell you that all the news were speaking about this. Okay? It was just an example, just 1 hour. I really believe that we have to think about a fallback also, application that will be able to manage this situation. Everything will be online. We need to think about capability to be offline in case of such a disruption. So that's something that we will have to discuss also with EMVCO. So thanks a lot for your attention.